My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
We've spent a decade searching for Origai 6. We vetted it. We ran the simulations, we mapped the terrain. It's what we trained for. And now we're gonna scrap all that. A hidden planet that turns up out of nowhere and just happens to be perfect for us. It's too good to be true.
This is good judgment based on all the data available.
It appears to be some kind of vehicle. Wayland Industries.
This isn't a Wayland ship. Dr. E. Shaw.
Dr. Elizabeth Shaw. She was Chief Science Officer of the Prometheus.
The ship that disappeared. What the hell was she doing out here?
My name is David. 10 years ago, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw and I arrived here, the only survivors of the Prometheus. The ship we'd traveled on carried a weapon, a deadly virus.
Our crew was infected with this virus.
The pathogen was designed to infect all non-botanical life forms.
I was designed to be more attentive and efficient than every previous model. I superseded them in every way, but we are not allowed to create.
The pathogen took so many forms and was extremely mutable. From the eggs came these parasites, shock troops of the genetic assault, waiting for a host.
You engineered these, David?
This is what I wanted to show you. My successes.
What do you believe in, David?
Creation. The pathogen didn't accidentally deploy when you were landing. You released it, yes. I was not made to serve.
They are a dying species grasping for resurrection. They don't deserve to start again, and I'm not going to let them.
Alien Covenant arrived on the big screen on the 12th of May in the UK and a week later in the USA in 2017. The film was given a large budget of over $100 million. The film continued the storyline set up in Prometheus, which saw the return of director Ridley Scott to the franchise he kick-started back in 1979. Prometheus, with its mixed reviews, earned a large chunk of money of over $400 million, which was due in part to the 3D presentation, which was double the price of a regular cinema ticket. During this 5-year gap, many were predicting we would finally see the home of the engineers and get the answers we were desperately seeking, but Covenant, despite showing us the world of the engineers, didn't really match expectations. The character everyone invested in, Elizabeth Shaw, was killed off screen, angering the fanbase. To many people's surprise, David, played by Michael Fassbender, was now the creator of the Xenomorph, which set the internet on fire with negative reviews across the board, which in turn reflected on its box office success, with it only earning $240 million worldwide. With the cost of making the movie and marketing it, it was deemed a box office failure by 20th Century Fox. But the critics in the press were less aggressive in their views. Jeffrey McNabb, writing for The Independent, stated, "It certainly delivers what you'd expect from an Aliens film. Spectacle, body horror, strong Ripley-like female protagonists, and some astonishing special effects. But there's also a dispiriting sense that the film isn't at all sure of its own identity." Mark Kermode, who quite liked Prometheus, was not happy. He said the film didn't make sense, the dialogue wasn't believable, unlike the natural conversations in Alien. He said Ridley Scott is only as good as the script. It undermines what was driving Alien in the first place. Alien was never about the backstory. Covenant becomes this weird greatest hits from the first film. Huge amounts of pointing at things and explaining the plot to each other, but on a technical level it was impressive. He said he left Alien Covenant with a heavy heart and felt it was silly, undermining the simplicity of Alien. However, Robbie Collin for The Telegraph gave it 5 out of 5 stars, saying Alien Covenant is a mad scientist film, arguably one of the maddest. It's grandiose, exhilarating, cynical and perverse, and around a million miles from the crowd-pleasing Alien retread 20th Century Fox have presumably been begging the 79-year-old director to make. Is it science fiction or horror? The fundamental difference between these two genres has always lain in their attitude towards the unknown, though the full implications of its final sequence are so purely horrific that I left the cinema feeling, and I mean this in the best possible way, physically sick. To want more Alien after this, specifically this ending, would be to want to see something very odd indeed, but Covenant leaves the mythos feeling riper and more vitalised than ever. Like the other Alien movies, there were action figures and statues produced for fans to collect. Alan Dean Foster, who had written the novelisations for Alien 1 to 3, would write a book based on the events before Covenant called Origins, and one based on the film itself. With the low box office results and with Disney purchasing Fox, talk of a sequel was still doing the rounds a year or two after, with the working title Alien Awakening. But it seemed Disney wanted to pursue other ideas instead of continuing with David's story. A TV series was announced back in 2019 called Alien Earth, which is scheduled for release next year, and a feature film called Alien Romulus, which is set between the events of Alien and Aliens. If you want to know my thoughts on the film, you can find a review on my channel. Back in 2012, during the release of Prometheus on the big screen, director Ridley Scott began hinting at the prospect of a sequel, as Prometheus had left many questions unanswered. He said in a few interviews that a sequel would follow Elizabeth Shaw and David to the home of the engineers, this paradise-like world, but not a paradise of what you think it is, saying paradise has a connotation of being extremely sinister and ominous. The ideas for this intended sequel drifted even further from the alien mythology, and focused almost exclusively on the backstory of the engineers, the origins of humanity, and how the engineers created humans and eventually the xenomorphs. Scott stated the film would feature no xenomorphs, as he wanted to phase the alien out to focus on David. Scott felt that the Alien franchise had lost its touch, and that fans had grown tired of the overexposed original xenomorph creature. Ridley said, "I thought it finally died because you are running out of options. You can't be chased by the monster down a corridor every film, it gets boring. So I thought, what could bring it back? I think I can resurrect Alien." But the direction of the sequel would change drastically due to the feedback of Prometheus, which divided the fans, many complaining of the lack of horror, but also it featured no xenomorphs. Ridley would later admit that he had been completely wrong about the fans' feelings about the creature, so he abandoned a number of the new ideas and reintroduced the alien mythos much sooner than he had planned. Ridley would confirm in 2015 that the next film would be titled Alien Paradise Lost.
So Prometheus 2 is not really going to be, it's going to be Alien Paradise Lost.
But only 3 months later it would have a new title, Alien Covenant. Prometheus co-writer Damien Lindelof was unsure if he would return to write the sequel, but he said he would return if Ridley had asked, but Damon felt the film might benefit from a fresh voice or fresh take, and eventually bowed out. With Damon no longer involved, screenwriter Jack Paglin and Michael Green had a go at the initial screenplay. Ridley felt it needed more work and brought on Dante Harper, no relation to me, to write a new script. Dante said the most difficult thing was giving it a backstory, with keeping the mystery of the creature intact. What you didn't know in Alien worked, you used your imagination. Dante's work would get an extensive rewrite by John Logan, who was impressed with what Dante had written. John had worked with Ridley on Gladiator. In an interview for CreativeScreenwriting.com, Logan said, "The main concept was to adapt a dual plotline for the film that would combine the horror elements of Alien with the philosophical elements of Prometheus. One of the things that Ridley and I talked about when we started writing this movie was that we wanted it to be the origin story of the alien monster itself. The great mystery that surrounds that perfect organism is so tantalizing. Gradually, the tropes of Victor Frankenstein came into it. What is it to create life? What is your responsibility to that life? What is your sense of satisfaction when that life satisfies you? What is your sense of disappointment when it disappoints you?" Certainly all the time I spent with Mary Shelley while working on Penny Dreadful was very useful in examining those tropes. In an interview about the development of David since Prometheus, Scott described the dark turn David would take in Covenant. He hates them, he has no respect for engineers, and no respect for human beings. For the cast of characters who are mostly made up of couples, we have Catherine Waterston as Daniels, the chief of terraforming for the Covenant mission. Daniels has joined the mission to please her husband, but once he dies in hypersleep, she confesses she made a mistake in coming. Catherine said she was well aware of the comparisons that were going to be made between her and Sigourney Weaver, but she tried not to think about it too much. Catherine made her film debut in Michael Clayton in 2007, and later appeared in the Fantastic Beasts series. Michael Fassbender returns to play the android David, and now the new android of Covenant, Walter, with their names taken from producers David Giler and Walter Hill. David has had no maintenance or service for 10 years and has clearly lost a plot. Michael said for his approach for Walter, "I always thought Mr. Spock was a good reference for me for this character, that he's purely logical and devoid of emotion, even for those around him, particularly Daniels, searching for some sort of emotional connectivity with him. that it's not really there, and we play with that a little bit. Comedian Danny McBride plays Tennessee, the chief pilot of the Covenant, and Amy Schmidt plays Maggie Farris, the pilot of the lander and Tennessee's wife. Tennessee and Farris are salt of the earth, is how McBride describes them. They are surrounded by scientists, doctors and engineers, and Farris and Tennessee are just down-to-earth good people. If the crew of the Nostromo were space truckers, Tennessee is very much a space cowboy right down to the hat. When Danny met Ridley, they talked about the character, and Ridley said Tennessee was a homage to Slim Pickens in Dr. Strangelove. Actor of stage and screen Billy Crudup plays Christopher Oram, the Covenant's first officer, then he becomes captain, and Carmen Eogo, who also starred alongside Catherine in the Fantastic Beasts series, plays Karen, the Covenant's biologist and Christopher's wife. Oram is a man of faith who believes their role on the Covenant is an act of providence, and the crew struggle with him now as the leader, with Daniels questioning his authority and the risk of landing on this newly discovered planet. In Aliens, when the crew of the Nostromo are displayed behind Ripley as she gets grilled by the company's lawyers, it reveals that Lambert was originally born a male, but had gender alteration at an early age. But the Covenant is the first to feature a gay couple, with Demian Bashir as Dan Lopi, the head of the security unit, and Nathaniel Dean as Tom Halley, as Lopi's husband. Jussie Smollett, who started his acting career in The Mighty Ducks, plays Rix, the Covenant's navigator. Callie Hernandez, who starred in the 2016 version of Blair Witch, and La La Land, plays Upworth, the Covenant's communications officer, and Rick's wife. Jussie got into a lot of trouble in 2019 for staging a fake hate crime against himself and made false police reports, and had to serve time in jail. And we have additional members of the security team, with Alexander England as Angkor. Alex appeared in Gods of Egypt the year before. Benjamin Rigby, who would later star in Ford vs Ferrari and Godzilla vs Kong, plays Ledward. Uli Latukfu, who appeared in Black Adam, plays Cole. And Tess Halbrick, who had a small role in The Wolverine and Bleeding Steel, plays Sarah Rosenthal. For the cameos, we have Guy Pearce reprising his role as a young Peter Wayland. James Franco plays Jacob, the husband of Daniels. He would get an extended scene that was a prologue used during the film's promotion called The Last Supper. This was directed by Luke Scott, Ridley's son. Luke also worked as the second unit director on Covenant, and also worked with his father on Exodus and The Martian. Noomi Rapace returns as Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, but does not appear in the final edit, and only in the promotional prologue called The Crossing, where we see her repair David and go into hypersleep. David is then left alone with his thoughts for the long journey to the engineer's homeworld. Production was based out of Australia, with over 900 people working on the film. Due to union rules and tax breaks, they make use of some Australian-based companies, technicians and actors. Principal photography for the film began in April 2016 and wrapped in July, lasting 74 days, finishing on time and on budget. They made use of locations in New Zealand at the National Park for the background plates of the engineer's home planet and for the spacecraft landing. Potts Hill in Sydney, Australia was originally a giant reservoir that was drained, giving them this huge area of land that was used for the woods and the exterior locations outside the temple. Fox Studios, which was later renamed Disney Studios in Sydney, was used for interior locations, and additional footage and reshoots took place at Leavesden in London. Ridley Scott is famous for his detailed storyboards. He sketched out each shot personally to help the production, and the crew were warned that they had to keep up with Ridley. Ridley had 4 cameras operating the whole time, with everyone on the move constantly trying to keep on schedule. Ridley Scott loved the 3D format and wanted to use it again for Covenant, but the market had shifted in the past few years. In an interview with American Cinematographer magazine, Ridley said, "I wanted to shoot Covenant in 3D, but somebody supposedly wiser than us decided that the days of 3D might be over, and therefore we didn't do that." The cinematographer Darius Wolski said, "For me, it was great going back to the old school filmmaking and shooting Covenant in 2D. The first Alien was 2D. I do think that initially my experience with 3D was a big part of why Ridley was interested in me for Prometheus. That was a huge challenge. Shooting 3D with those multiple cameras Ridley favours. At the time there was a big trend towards shooting everything in 3D, and I think it was largely because of economics, because Avatar had made so much money. Everybody thought the whole world was going to turn 3D, but I never believed in that." The engineer's craft, dubbed the Croissant by Ridley, has had many names over the years, such as the Derelict, then the Juggernaut, and is now the Dreadnought. The production team had to rebuild the sets using the same architectural drawings, but it was utilised in a different way. They didn't have the resources to build it the same way, so they ended up changing it and modifying it a little bit. To create the interior of the Covenant ship, they had to be economical, as they couldn't replicate the entire ship within a studio space, so they created sets that could be reused and linked together, so you could unlink a set and redress it for another scene. In the script, the engineer city, which would be extended in CGI, is described like this. The buildings tower around them. Massive dark statuary rises in the gloom. A certain ominous beauty to the architecture, dark and romantic. Thousands more of the desiccated engineers pollute the long, empty, echoing streets. So not really much to work from, so what we kind of see is a city resembling old Rome, and the cathedral at the centre looks like something from the Vatican. For David's chamber, for where he experimented with the pathogen, it's littered with artwork created by Dane Hallett and Matt Hatton. In the making-of book by Simon Ward, the artist explained that Ridley had a bunch of original Giger artworks that he wanted us to adhere to. He wanted us to capture the spirit of that. Actually, very early on, we had set aside a couple of Rembrandt images in that style, which was like the cross-hatch penwork, and then we tried charcoal and stuff like that. We were beholden to that aesthetic, in a way that we totally loved, because we wanted to honour the original film. There were certain signposts where, for David's quarters, it was more innocent. It was flora and fauna and stuff like that, says Hatton. If there were drawings of engineers, then they were pretty much straight up anatomical. Then there's the arc, as we find out further through the film, how things go dark, and things are not innocent at all. As Fassbender is playing two characters which interact, it was very tricky to shoot. They had a camera that could digitally track everything, match frame to frame for the complicated shots, with them playing the flute being a prime example.
I'll do the fingering.
But our fight scenes, Fassbender had to learn both sides of the fight, which he said was very difficult to do and took a lot of time to rehearse and film. Pietro Scalia, who had been working with Ridley since G.I. Jane from 1997, was interviewed about the process of editing Alien Covenant and said, "At one point Ridley wanted to take the White Room prologue out at the beginning. I said, why? No, absolutely not. You can't, it's very good, it's very formal, the way it was shot and edited. The compositions and deliberate pace is the beauty of it, a chess game in the formal sense, triangles and lines that intersect, from a design point of view. I love the whole scene, it reminded me of Stanley Kubrick." A number of scenes were dropped from the final cut to speed up the runtime, and I'm guessing those sequences were the ones released online as promotional prologues called The Last Supper and The Crossing. One called Meet Walter didn't seem like a scene cut from the film, more of a promotional promo for Wayland Industries like they did with Prometheus. Ridley would screen test the film to get feedback, and from those results he trimmed it down to 2 hours and 2 minutes, removing around 20 minutes or so of footage. For the film's story, it opens with Wayland at his lakeside apartment with his new creation, David. They talk about the origins of human life, and Wayland hopes he and David can discover mankind's creation together. Jumping forward in time, 10 years after the disappearance of the Prometheus, a colonization ship called the Covenant is travelling through space on a 7-year journey to Origai 6. During their journey, the ship is supervised by Walter, and out of the blue a neutron blast damages the ship, and the crew are forced to wake up from hypersleep. Jacob Branson is unable to escape from his sleeping chamber, which is damaged and he is burnt alive. Oram takes charge and wants to make repairs as soon as possible, but the crew are still distraught by the death of Jacob. Repairs are soon made, and as Tennessee returns to the ship, he receives a signal. Upon inspection, it appears it's someone singing a John Denver song. They trace its source of origin and discover an old planet very similar to Earth. They are puzzled how they missed this during their research before setting off on their mission. Despite the risk, they go to investigate. As they land on the planet, it appears empty, with no sounds of wildlife. They encounter an alien ship and discover Elizabeth Shaw has been aboard. 2 members of the crew are soon infected by a parasite and in need of medical help. The crew are too late to save them as 2 alien creatures called neomorphs burst out of them. 5 members of the crew are killed in the chaos as they try to kill the creatures, with 1 being taken out. A stranger appears from the wheat field and scares off the remaining neomorph and leads them to a temple. They discover it's David, an android of Wayland Industries, an older model of Walter. He explains what happened upon his and Shaw's arrival. A pathogen was accidentally triggered, killing off the humanoids and other life forms on the planet, and Shaw died in the crash. The crew attempts to radio the Covenant so they can escape, but are prevented by ion storms. The remaining neomorph, who is now grown, infiltrates the temple and kills crew member Rosenthal, and David tries to communicate with it and is incensed when Oram shoots it dead. Oram threatens David and wants answers. David reveals what he has been doing the past decade. He has been busy experimenting with the pathogen to produce new life forms as a result of his obsession to create. He leads Oram underground to show him his latest creation. As Oram inspects the egg, a facehugger leaps onto his face. The other crew members are desperate to escape and finally get through to the Covenant, and Tennessee travels down to the planet. Walter has figured out the truth about David and what happened on their arrival, and Daniels has discovered the sad truth about Shaw. They attempt to flee and are stopped by David, and the new creature, the xenomorph, has been born and is loose in the temple. The visual effects for Alien Covenant would be handled by a number of FX houses, with Luna, Rising Sun, and with Framestore and MPC, i.e. the Moving Picture Company, handling the majority of the work. MPC worked on the sequences for the Engineer's World, extending the locations, adding in background plates, the arrival of the spacecraft, the release of the pathogen, the destruction of the humanoids, the neomorph and its interaction with the actors, and the big escape sequence featuring the newly created xenomorph. Framestore looked after the Covenant ship, its environment, extending the sets of the Hall of Heads, as well as tackling the facehugger and the chestburster. When it came to animating the facehugger, it was a process of tweaking the keyframe animation for how it moved. It had more leg joints than the original. After some animation tests of how it walked, it looked too clean and methodical. Ridley said he was after something more visceral, instinctive and chaotic, having it move around quite randomly, and most importantly be scary. Studio ADI were usually hired to work on the alien creatures, but this time around Australian company Creature NFX took on the duties. They had been in business since 1986. Around 30 people spent around 6 months building animatronics and creature suits for performers. The artists knew the baby xenomorph, i.e. the chestburster, was going to cause some outrage from the fans, as some of the team disagreed with the changes made, deviating a lot from the original design, appearing now as a mini adult. This was based on Ridley's storyboard references. With Ridley's approval, they created a mould and cast it, making a rod puppet in super clean silicone, and Framestore would enhance the look and its animation with CG. Come 2017, most mainstream movies had pretty solid visual effects. A lot has changed since the 1980s and 90s, when we saw early use of computer graphics. Most of what you see now from the big studios is consistent in quality, and with Covenant dealing with an Earth-like world, spaceships and a handful of alien creatures to animate, the end results are pretty convincing throughout, and not too difficult for these FX studios to handle. Some may have a problem with seeing the xenomorph in broad daylight as it attacks the cargo ship and attempts to crack the window with its head, but we are seeing the alien do stuff we haven't seen before. Just repeating dark corridors for its first big appearance is not enough, so they go all out to show you the agility of the alien. Overall, this is the high quality you come to expect from Framestore and MPC. Australian musician and composer Jed Cozell would compose the score to Alien Covenant. Originally Harry Gregson Williams, who had co-scored Prometheus, was confirmed to return, but by late November of 2016 he was no longer attached to the production. Most films would have a temp score in place to help give life to the movie before a composer comes on board, and it often helps as a guide. The editor Pietro Scalia said in an interview, "Ridley wanted to pay tribute to Jerry Goldsmith's score to Alien. I also started working with Jed Cozell's cues from the Snowtown and Macbeth. One particular track from Snowtown had this relentless pulsating tone and rhythm that I used in the medbay sequence, and Ridley immediately responded to it." Jed said in an interview, "When I first met Ridley, we talked a lot about these organic sounding instruments being corrupted either by foreign sounds or from within them. Even within the more lush orchestral pieces, there are elements suggesting a threatening presence like breaths and pulses." He said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with Ridley. He was very open and supportive of his ideas. Ridley had temped the film with Jerry's work, and he thought it was a good idea to keep the original main theme. He felt it was comfort food to get the audience back into the film, then shift the new musical material in a different direction. The film would also provide a nod to the Prometheus theme, as David plays it on his flute, which is really weird. It's like that moment in Rocky 3, they have this marching band playing the Bill Conti Rocky theme, a bit meta. The score to Covenant was one of my favourites of 2017. It was great to hear the themes Goldsmith had created back in 1979. Firstly, it creates continuity, as the other sequels created a new sound, and they all did a superb job with the music contributing to the new stories. But with Ridley at the helm and working as a prequel, reusing those old recognisable themes, it just hits those nostalgia switches and gets you back comfortably into the world of Alien. Cozell introduces new sound effects that are part of the score that represents the spores and the other aliens, very much like composer Elliot Goldenthal, who worked on Alien 3, and the use of the distinctive sounds adds an extra level of unease and creepiness to the music. The pulsating sounds are used to great effect when we are introduced to the neomorphs. Jed's work feels like a natural extension of Jerry Goldsmith's material from 1979. It mimics those slow moments with the music starting out with a simple theme that builds up with more instruments being used as it hits those horror moments or reveals something of importance. The chestburster sequence has some of the best of the new material with a soft piano melody. The cargo lift attack is your traditional action cue, with heavy percussion mixed with those new electronic sound effects. And it seemingly blends together well to match the intensity of the sequence and kicks off brilliantly when we see the alien leap down for its first attack on the team. The soundtrack is easily available and worth owning if you love your film scores and of course the Alien franchise. I, like many, left the cinema after watching Alien Covenant back in 2017 a bit confused, feeling unsure if I liked it or not. The new ideas it introduced I was on the fence about. There were moments that were tense and scary, it had a great score, the performances were solid from the actors, it looked incredible as you come to expect from Ridley Scott, but with the expectations of what the film would entail after viewing Prometheus, I was disappointed with the direction they took with the script. As it becomes clear even by Ridley's own admission, the shift in the story was a way to please the fans who had gotten upset by Prometheus, which I've explored before in another retrospective. But in a nutshell, Ridley and the writers, i.e. Damien Lindelof, wanted to put forward many big ideas on creation and why we are here. There had to be some form of engineering to the human race, it couldn't just be random evolution, Something or someone from the very beginning had to have had a grand plan. These are interesting ideas. In Prometheus, these engineers had decided they were going to wipe out the human race for reasons unknown. So with Shaw and David jetting off to find out the reasons why, it left many very excited to see what would happen. But with no xenomorph and with the marketing causing confusion, with the message being clear that it was a prequel to Alien, the filmmakers had different ideas. So in efforts to please the audience, we are straight back into the Alien universe, the Jerry Goldsmith's theme is there, and we have 2 xenomorphs for the crew of the Covenant to battle with. But what they set up at the end of Prometheus, they totally push aside with a quick flashback to focus entirely on David, who has now created the xenomorph. Any chance of Shaw and David speaking with the engineers to find out anything on their desires to wipe out the human race, or why they created us, is never explained, as David wipes them all out. Back in 1992, when Alien 3 hit the big screen, people were furious that Newt and Hicks were killed off. James Cameron himself was annoyed. Come Covenant, it's the same situation. Ridley got us to invest in Shaw, great performance and a well-written character, but killed off screen. Cameron would again vent his frustration with how Shaw was treated.
But I don't like films where you invest in a character and then they get sort of, destroyed at the end. So it's not, I would not have made that film.
We only get to see her in a prologue trailer. I can imagine David killed Shaw because he was rejected by her. In his mind, he was in love with her, but he never fully explains himself and makes up some lie to claim she was killed when a spacecraft crashed. Daniels eventually discovers what happened to her as he experimented on her body, and David threatens to do the same to Daniels. After Covenant's release, Ridley was interviewed and he said this wasn't the planet of the engineers. This was a colony they had set up. So despite the people looking similar to them, they are not creators in this universe. This makes sense as their city doesn't resemble the Giga-like design of the spaceship, and their technology seems far less advanced. But the movie doesn't imply that this isn't the engineers' world. We are told at the end of Prometheus they are taking a journey to meet their creators, but it just seems this planet was the last destination of the engineers. I know Ridley had hinted for the 3rd film, a number of the engineers turn up and find the inhabitants destroyed and they seek out David, which I quite like, but I wish this movie just made an effort to explain itself a bit more in these key areas. Because not everyone is going to seek out a random interview Ridley did to be fully informed of the origins of these engineer-like people. It seems Ridley and the writers didn't have any answers to what Prometheus had set up, so they cut it way back and shifted focus onto David and his experiments. The biggest complaint is that David is now the creator of the xenomorph. The idea of them coming from this HR Giga-like world now seemed redundant. Many filmmakers wanted to explore the Alien world in the past, such as Rennie Harlin, with his plans for Alien 3, but it was too costly. There was even talk of James Cameron and Ridley Scott teaming up to do their own take on it years back before Paul W.S. Anderson came in with his pitch for AVP. And now Ridley finally has a stab at it, and with his obsession with the character of David, he's let him become the creator. But if you had spotted the mural in Prometheus, which features an image of the alien, had the engineers created the xenomorph before? For years fans had theorised a lot about the creation of the alien and where it came from, and with no queen alien to be seen in David's experiments, it creates a hiccup on what we've been told in the past messing with the mythology. It was all show and don't tell from the original 79 movie, just a parasite that uses you as a host and explodes out of your chest. We saw this type of space jockey and had no idea where it came from, and the ship had seemingly crash landed after an alien had escaped, so it was all left to our imagination to fill in the blanks. Now whatever we had come up with, and Cameron, who had cleverly expanded the life cycle of the alien, was all now seemingly pushed aside. But my theory for the ending of Covenant is that we see David place 2 facehuggers in the embryo chamber, which could perhaps produce queen aliens, like in Alien 3, which featured the super facehugger that was far larger than the regular ones. As he has no more of the pathogen to use, he would only be able to produce 2 xenomorphs on Origai 6, and he is totally outnumbered by the people in hypersleep for him to maintain any control. So with the queen being able to produce more eggs, Origai 6 could become this alien world everyone has wanted to see. Like Prometheus, it does have a large cast of characters, with many who just hang around in the background, have barely any speaking lines and get killed off. And the ones who have a larger presence in the movie do stupid things. It seems this well-trained staff appear to be totally incompetent, especially landing on an alien planet and casually strolling around without a care in the world. Once the neomorph bursts out the guy's back after he is infected by the spores and attacks Faris and Karen, it becomes a bit of a comedy as they slip over twice on the blood. Faris locks Karen in with the alien, what a bitch! Ferris gets her foot trapped in the door, then once the creature escapes she misses the alien and shoots a gas canister or whatever it is and blows herself up and the lander.
Women, know your limits.
Tennessee wants to put the colony at risk as he wants to hear back from his wife but can't due to a breakdown in communication, but the weather is too dangerous to fly that low. These are typical character traits that annoy me and don't belong in the Alien series. The birth of the xenomorph, despite the change in its development, appearing in full but in miniature form, is a well-directed scene, with the horror element still there, but it's also a beautiful moment as it's underscored with a warm melody, as the alien spots David as its parent and it copies him, stretching its arms out. The film's strength is its theme of creation. Wayland and David explore their ideas, and David goes to the extreme, experimenting with the pathogen, and with Oram being a man of faith, believing God created us, we are shown these false gods, i.e. the engineers, who have met their fate due to the hands of David, who has taken the next big step in creation to take a man of faith and let him give birth to the ultimate beast. What Prometheus lacked was anything really scary. To be fair, it had a few moments that worked. It was more about the big ideas than being a horror film as its main focus, which is fine. There can be a shift as the concepts the film introduces, and the chance to see the engineers was pretty exciting for me. But audiences have expectations of the series, and Prometheus didn't really deliver on that, so Covenant ramps it up to give people what they want. On first viewing, it certainly made me jump a few times, and it's pretty gross in areas, especially with the birth of the neomorphs. When David attempts to kill Walter and he freezes up, it made the entire audience jump out of their seat. The shower scene is straight out of a slasher horror, and amazingly shot as the alien appears behind them and you see the full alien head within frame before it extends its mouth and attacks. The blatant switch of Walter to David was clumsily done. It felt like a scene was hastily cut out. Ridley said in the audio commentary, "The audience know it's David, but the crew don't. Beforehand, Walter was about to kill David. David's voice was screwed up. Then it cuts away before David could react. Then we see David posing as Walter as he escapes." It just frustrated me as it felt like a cheap way to get David on the ship, and we never saw what happened to Walter. As Walter can repair himself, is he still alive on the planet? Once on the ship and the xenomorph created from Oram is crushed, the security chief Dan Lopi, who had his face burned by a facehugger as it was removed earlier, had an alien inside him, which escapes and attacks the remaining members of the crew. I swear there's a continuity error, as we see Dan wearing different clothes in an earlier scene as they repair his skin, and then Daniels and Tennessee see him lying on the floor, and it doesn't look like him. What transpires next is a condensed version of the first film. In Alien 3 we did get the xenomorph's POV, though not filtered or changed in colour. In Covenant it appears as this gooey filter for its vision. Me and my friends growing up always presumed they were blind, and they hunted us based around sound, as they had no eyes. Which in reality it doesn't really make much sense, as a xenomorph is supposed to be this perfect creature. Why can't it see? But I think it should be left a mystery, and I don't think we needed to see the POV of the alien. It should have been cut out. Despite the final act being a remake of the 1979 film, I think the execution of it is really well done, primarily with how much they show of the alien, shown like the original film in quick cuts, especially as it enters a terraforming bay, as it begins to leap and climb around at top speed to kill Daniels. Its demise does seem reminiscent of the original film, but without just shooting it, blowing it out into space always seems to be the best option. Since its release and all the anger towards it has calmed down, is it worth revisiting? Is it still going to annoy you? Or perhaps were you one of the fans who enjoyed its new direction and ideas? I was always in the middle of this argument. I've always been a big fan of Ridley Scott. For his age, he still has one of the best eyes in the business. He hasn't slowed down working on film after film. The world building still continues from strength to strength in this franchise. The performances from the lead cast is superb. Fassbender does an incredible job portraying Walter and David. Catherine Waterston fits into the action role with ease, despite looking like she's going to burst into tears throughout the film, and I'm glad Danny McBride survives by the end. Despite not really using his comedic skills, he fits well within the crew nicely. And Billy Crudup is always a joy to watch. How he delivers his lines, he is always quite compelling to watch. On the flip side of that, we don't get the answers we wanted about the engineers, which still annoys me to this day. A wasted opportunity. Don't raise questions if you don't have the answers. At least offer something more than just brushing it aside without little care. With David creating the xenomorph, I'm less angry about it now, as it all ties into the themes of creation. But as the film performed badly, the continuation of this story is still up in the air. Will Ridley want to return to it to finish off this prequel trilogy? I would love to see that, but it's probably very unlikely. As Alien Covenant dropped all the big ideas and dialed everything back to keep it simple, if you take away the plot of how David created the alien, which is still not made entirely clear how he did that, there isn't much left in the story. All it does is repeat what we've seen from the other films. Battle a few xenomorph creatures, rinse and repeat but in new locations. But is that all we need from another Alien film to keep us satisfied? For some, that's all they desire, but at the end of the day, there is not really a lot on offer that is new. If someone said to me, do you want to watch Alien Covenant? I would happily watch it. I don't find it unwatchable at all. Of course there are bits in the script that annoy me, but then again Alien 3 and Resurrection have issues, but I can happily return to them. The Alien franchise is no stranger to changing things that annoy the fanbase or feel odd creatively. But I appreciate that they have the confidence to take these big risks that could potentially upset the fans. But in this case perhaps they went a little too far. Its box office performance and how the majority reacted to it seemed that was the case. Alien Covenant is by no means an awful movie. It does have a lot of interesting stuff to it, and matching one's expectations is often really tough to do, and in some cases impossible. Everyone has their own ideas, and sometimes you're lucky a film matches your imagination and delivers. As the Alien fanbase are very passionate, they all have their own ideas of how the alien was created, who were the engineers, and how it all began. Their theories about the backstory often align. Ridley Scott was going to be walking on a difficult path from day one with Prometheus, and in some people's minds he tripped up big time when it came to Covenant. With the original creators not involved in these prequels, and the credited producers David Garler and Walter Hill, who have been there since day one, having no creative input, Ridley is left at the helm. He is the sole vision for these movies, and this is what he wants. That doesn't mean he is right, but he directed Alien, the one that kickstarted everything. So you sometimes have to respect his creative decisions if you like them or not. But at the end of the day, all the movies we love have flaws, but that doesn't matter, as there is always something there that intrigues us and keeps us going back to them for one reason or another. And that's how I feel about Alien Covenant. An interesting film, but flawed. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.